Welcome to The Story Behind the Symptoms, a podcast from Symptomatic.me. Your host is David Clark, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. Each episode, we dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey towards knowledge that becomes healing.
Welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. My name is Dave Clark. I'm a board-certified internal medicine and gastroenterology physician and president of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms. And over the last 40 years, I have interviewed over 7,000 people who had pain or illness, but no disease or injury to explain it. And what we're going to do in this podcast is not a medical evaluation, which is always been done for my guests, and it's not psychotherapy. What it is a conversation that we hope will be educational for everybody, for my guests, for me, and for everybody who's viewing it, because I'm going to do something I don't do when I am seeing patients clinically, and that is to explain my thinking as we go along so that everybody kind of gets an idea of what's going on in my thought process, because normally in a real encounter with a patient, I'm not doing that. I'm just listening and thinking, and it's mostly behind the scenes. But again, we're trying to be educational here, and that's why I'm going to be pausing the conversation from time to time to explain what's happening in my head. My guest, Bailey, and I have never met before, and I haven't reviewed her history, so this is going to be an educational experience for both of us. So Bailey, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we will get rolling.
Thank you, Dave. So I am from Orem, Utah, if any of you know where Orem is at. I am 24 years old. I started with chronic pain when I was about probably 18 or 17 or so. I work in marketing, and I don't know, my life is kind of boring. I'm not as cool as Dave, I'll say that. So that's really it about me. And yep, married, and we have a dog. That's basically it.
Okay, why don't you tell me more about the story of your symptoms? That's always where I start. I like to know the chronology of how and when they got going and what their pattern has been over time.
Yeah, so my symptoms first started, I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I served in Los Angeles, and as soon as I started in Los Angeles, I started having really bad back pain. It kind of started in my mid-back, but it would move into my upper back and my lower back, and I had never had that happen before. And so I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to serve the rest of my mission. It was interfering with the work I needed to do. I couldn't go out and it's called proselyting. It's just where we go out and walk and knock doors. It was really hard to do that because my back pain was always super bad. And I had no idea what it was from. I just kind of assumed it was because of all the hard work I was doing of walking and going out. And so I just tried to manage it by massaging it, by laying down more often, and yeah, that was where it all started.
Okay, and it's been now 6 or 7 years. What has been the pattern over that period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it would just come up. It was probably on a weekly basis. On one day, it would get really, really bad. The back pain would start in the mid-back. It would kind of feel numb a little bit. It would travel down to the lower back. It would travel up to my traps and my neck. But then over the days, it would kind of gradually decrease and subdue. And then it would go away. But then the next week, it would start up again all of a sudden and then subdue. And for the past, like you said, 6 years, that would happen on a weekly basis. I thought it was just a random occurrence. I thought, there's something wrong with my back. I don't know what. I saw doctors about it. I got MRIs for my back, and there was no structural damage. They're like, well, maybe flip your mattress over, do some stretches in the morning. And I was like, okay, but I feel like that's not a good answer because I'm doing stretches. I'm doing these things. I don't think it's my mattress. So yeah, just on a weekly basis, it kept coming back. tried getting answers and I wasn't getting any answers at all. And I was just kind of discouraged. I was like, well, I guess I just am going to have to live with this for the rest of my life because no one's giving me a straight answer of what's happening.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the clear description. It's interesting. A study was done that shows that when a doctor is encountering a patient, they ask, how can I help you or what's going on? The physician will typically interrupt the patient's description of their symptoms after 18 seconds. And when they do that, they are potentially cutting off important information. The studies have also shown that people come to the doctor usually with 3 or 4 concerns. And if you interrupt the patient after 18 seconds, they're probably not going to get more than concern number 1 expressed. And you can, as a physician, miss a lot of important information because many people keep the most important concern they have to number 3 or 4 on the list. So what I tried to do is just shut up and listen, basically, and let you tell your story however long it takes. And the studies also show that it usually takes about 2 or 3 minutes is all. And if you can just, as a doctor, wait until everything has been described, you're going to end up in a much better place diagnostically. What's happening with the doctors is they are, they're trained when they hear about a symptom to immediately a list of possibilities appears in their head and they want to narrow down that list. And that's why they're prompted to ask these questions so quickly. Turns out to be a mistake. So what happened over the following years? Are you still having the back pain or has it gotten better or worse?
Yeah. So again, like I said earlier, so I served my mission in, it was around 2019 to 2021. It was for 2 years. And when I came back, it was kind of maybe a little bit better. It was starting to get a little bit better. But I was just living at home with my parents. And whenever I was home, the back pain would always come up. And that was kind of my first clue that maybe something was going on. Because whenever I was around my parents, whenever I was just in my room doing nothing, the pain would start happening. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. But then I got married, and this was actually my first marriage. So I am divorced. And so in my first marriage, the back pain started coming up again, and it was a little bit worse, but it wasn't as bad as the mission. So I just thought, okay, maybe progressively the pain is going to start getting better. But then after 1 year of marriage, I got divorced. And as soon as the divorce happened, it just plummeted. Like my back pain was so bad. I had to have my parents massage my back every day. They had one of those massage guns, and they would use that on my back. And I just had to lay in bed all the time, which obviously wasn't healthy for me being divorced and just laying in bed all day. But I thought it was the best remedy for my physical health. And at the time, I thought my mental health too. And so the back pain was severely worse. It was really bad. And combined with the fact that I was living back with my parents. And I want to set the record straight. I love my parents before we get further into this, but I started understanding that maybe something was happening just being around my family that was aggravating the pain a little bit. And yeah, it was awful. And that was until 2023. So that was about a year of that severe back pain. And then I met my current husband. And for those of you that don't know, my current husband, Luke Jones, he works for Dr. David Clark. And so he started telling me kind of about the work and stuff. And at first I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't connect anything. But then as we started dating more and more, Luke told me one day, he was like, you know what? I think you have chronic pain. No, I don't. No, that's just some weird niche for your guys' nonprofit. And he was like, no, what you're describing to me is very much what my doctor treats and talks about. And so we started talking about it, and then things started clicking. And I took the survey that you guys have on your website to maybe see if you have chronic pain. And one of the questions is if you imagine yourself as a butterfly, just on the wall, and you're looking at a child that you love that is in your exact childhood situation, would you be sad or happy? And so I thought of that, and I pictured one of my nieces living my childhood life, and I felt really sad and I started to cry and I was like, oh no. I was like, I think I do have chronic pain. And then I started realizing, I was like, do I actually have like childhood trauma? And it never occurred to me. And I think trauma is kind of a harsh word too. I want to
It
give
is.
my parents credit. They were great parents. Like, they were never abusive. They were never like, they never neglected me or anything. But so I don't think trauma is the right word in my scenario, but I do think that I had struggles as a child and I didn't feel loved as a child. And once the things started clicking, I was just like, okay, what can I do about this? Because I definitely think I have this. So that's kind of when the pieces started to click and I started to understand where this pain was coming from a little bit more.
My apologies for interrupting, but I wanted to ask you to become a member of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms so that we can continue to bring this vital science-based information to everyone who deserves to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, that is very insightful. So many of my encounters with patients resemble the patient kind of handing me jigsaw puzzle pieces about their life, and they're giving them to me in somewhat random order, and I don't necessarily know what the final picture is going to look like. And sometimes a very important piece will be given in the first 5 minutes, and then another very important piece will be given 25 minutes later. So that's, often how these conversations go. But you've provided, a tremendous amount of information. And because you know Luke, I think you've got a much more organized concept of all this in your head than my average patient would. One of the first clues was the way your pain moved around your body from the low back up into the neck and trapezoids. The movement of pain is one of the characteristics of neuroplastic pain, and you definitely had that. So just in hearing that, I'm right away very suspicious that your symptoms were neuroplastic, even if you hadn't had normal MRIs on top of it. Just, if you were coming in for the first time and I heard about pain moving around like that, that would be a big clue. And then I'm looking for, if I think it's neuroplastic, I'm looking to hear about stress in a person's life. And the fact that it started, at the time of a major transition in your life where you're away from home for the first time and you're going from Orem, Utah to Los Angeles, California, which are not exactly the same kind of places by any means. So somewhat of a cultural shock. And of course, most of the people you're proselytizing are Spanish speaking. And so that's another aspect of the cultural shock. So definitely a stress going on there. Then, talking about that question about imagining a child you care about growing up exactly as you did, it's, none of us has a parallel life we can compare ourselves with. So most of my patients, when they look back, are usually not fully aware of how much stress or trauma or pressure they were under. It's not always what we'd characterize as a trauma, as you point out. But most of them, when they look back, they're not necessarily recognizing how difficult it was. But when they imagine a child they care about, either one of their own or somebody else's, then they can get a more accurate perspective. It starts to become clear that there are things that happened that you would not want for a child of your own.
Yeah.
And when people can recognize that, it gives us something to work with. It gives us something to approach treatment-wise. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Many of my patients grew up in homes where the parents were doing the best they could, trying to provide the right environment for their kids. But at the same time, they were either making mistakes they didn't mean to, or they were generating pressure and didn't recognize how much pressure they were putting on. They were trying to do their best as parents. They were trying to raise their children in a way that they would function well as adults, but inadvertently they were creating a lot of pressure on their kids. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more about what you were seeing that was maybe not the best.
Yeah. That's exactly how I would categorize my parents, is just putting an unhealthy amount of pressure on a young child to, I guess, achieve perfectionism. I felt like that was the goal growing up. I felt like I needed to do everything right, everything perfect, or my parents weren't going to love me. And one memory that comes to mind is, I don't know if you all know this, but Krispy Kreme offers a free donut for every A that you get on your grade.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it was awesome growing up, but it put a lot of pressure on me because whenever we'd get our grades back, I was so nervous if I wasn't going to have an A because all my siblings were getting A's and it was just kind of expected, And I remember walking into Krispy Kreme and I was looking at my grade card and I saw that I had 2 B's. And I was in elementary school and I was so self-conscious about my intelligence and just like not being smart enough. And especially since I'm the youngest, I have 4 older siblings. I thought they were way smarter than me. And so I just kind of expected them to, have all A's and that I was supposed to live up to that. And so when I looked at my grade card and I saw that I had 2 B's, I was terrified. I did not want to face my parents. I wanted to cry and go hide. And I remember my dad taking the grade card and he was like, "Babe, you have 2 B's." And he put the paper down and he was like, "Babe, what's happening?" And I was probably 8 or 9 at the time. And I was so embarrassed because all of my siblings were watching me and I was like, "Oh man, I'm so dumb. My parents hate me now. I'm never going to live up to what they want." And there's so many other instances like that where just growing up, I wanted to show my parents that I was capable of doing things, that I was smart and that I was reliable and that I could do things. And I just always felt like I let them down. And because of that, I still have pretty bad self-esteem issues. I still feel like I'm not capable to do things, especially in the workplace. I feel like everyone's being Bailey doesn't know what she's doing. And I always have to feel like I have to stand up for myself and make it clear that I know what I'm doing, that I'm confident. And I feel like it's really trickled down in my life with self-esteem, with having to be perfect, even in my marriage. Luke knows this. I'm working on it, but I feel like things need to be perfect sometimes. I have this ideal vision, which is unrealistic, right? And so whether that's with me or with my husband, it's trickled down all throughout my life. And again, like you said earlier, my parents were doing their best. They wanted me to get good grades. They wanted me to succeed. They wanted these good things for me, but it was always me letting them down. And I could see it visually on their faces. What they were saying to me wasn't kind. They weren't saying, "It's okay, Bailey, you'll do better next time." They were saying, "Why is this happening? You have to do better," And so because of that, I was just always so down on myself, always wanting to be better. And I never received that validation. And that's still a thing today. When we go to my parents' house, I'm always seeking validation from my parents. I'm always trying to tell them things that I'm proud of, or "Hey, Mom and Dad, I got a $600 bonus at work. Are you proud of me?" And it's not the response I'm expecting. It's not, "Haley, we're so proud of you." It's, "Oh, what are you doing at work that gave you that bonus?" Or, "Wow, they gave you a bonus? That's surprising." It's Mom and Dad, I always go in thinking that I'm going to get validation, that they're going to say, "We love you so much," but it's always, I could be a little bit better, and
Yeah, you jump over a bar and only to find that the bar has been moved up.
My apologies for interrupting. Just to let you know that if you leave a review and subscribe to the channel, you will help a lot more people to find this information. Thank you.
Yes, 100%. And I will say, I'm living their perfect life they envisioned for me, right? I am married to the best man in the world. We have a home, which is crazy in this economy. Somehow we were able to buy a house. We both have stable jobs. We're very financially stable. We're very happy. We love each other. But yet I still feel like my parents' expectations for us are even higher. And I just don't know when that's going to stop, I don't know when the expectations for me are ever going to align.
Yeah.
Gonna
No,
be
it's common for a lot of parents who want their kids to succeed to feel like, well, if I praise my kid, they're gonna feel like, okay, I've achieved enough. I'm gonna kick back. I'm gonna become a slacker. And if the parent could have fully lived the experience you had as an 8 or 9-year-old with those two Bs, if the experience that you had in your head at that moment, they could have fully shared it for 5 minutes, I think they would have been horrified, and they would have realized that they were inflicting far more pressure than they intended, and obviously would ever be appropriate for a kid that age, or pretty much anybody. But, it's very difficult sometimes for parents to know what they're doing in terms of how much pressure they're putting on. And this does have long-term consequences. It was a mistake that I made many times early in my career to think that to get long-term consequences of adversity in childhood, that it had to be very obvious and nasty forms of abuse. My very first patient was sexually assaulted hundreds of times, for example, as a girl. And that was the level that I assumed for a long time the trauma had to be in order to cause a person to become physically ill as an adult. But eventually I realized that it can be any treatment of a child that knocks their self-esteem down on a long-term basis, that makes them feel like they're not measuring up, or they're second rate, or they're worthless. Anything that does that to a kid on a long-term basis can lead to real physical symptoms, neuroplastic symptoms as an adult. And it leads to many other forms of stresses as well, some of which you've touched on, which are, personality traits that are stressful, feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like an imposter, whatever job you have, you don't know how you got it. You must have fooled somebody to have hired you for this is a common one. Being very self-critical, whenever you make a mistake, you are much more critical of yourself than you ever would be for somebody else in the office who made the same mistake, for example. Perfectionism, you mentioned, being very detail-oriented, reliable, being very compassionate towards other people. I don't know if you've noticed that in yourself, but
yes.
trying hard to, when you detect suffering in another person, you're the kind of person that tends to reach out to them or provide them with support. And another one, to be honest, is, when you become so focused on meeting the needs of somebody else, namely your parents, trying to achieve whatever it is that will make them happy, it also can lead to choosing relationship partners that have some of those same needs, where you are giving to that person a lot more than you're getting back. And then the relationships are unbalanced. And I'm guessing that your first marriage probably had some of that characteristic.
Yeah, 100%. It was a cycle of where I was giving and giving and giving, and I felt like I wasn't getting anything back. So then I would resort to anger or frustration and sadness, and I try and express these emotions to be like, hey, I need help here, but then he would shut down. And so inadvertently, it was this cycle. And when he'd shut down, I'd go back to being compassionate and saying, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I shouldn't have been angry. Let me give. And then when I wasn't getting anything back, it was that continuous cycle. And I also forgot to mention that I was diagnosed with ADHD. It was around 3 months ago. Never thought I had ADHD. Never ever occurred to me. But I learned this statistic that I can't remember the exact number, but if you're in a marriage where the husband doesn't have ADHD and the wife has ADHD, likelihood of divorce is around like 60 or 70%. And that's how I felt like also my ADHD was manifesting, was never feeling like I'm good enough, having to mask my emotions a lot of the time and to give. There are a lot of other things that go with that. But I'm curious as to if the ADHD is a product of anything of my childhood, or if it's just the way, I was born. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, let's just say that from my perspective, there's a good chance that issue will improve or go away as you continue to make progress with these long-term impacts of the childhood adversity. It's clear that you've done a lot of work on your own. Many of my patients, they stay in those unbalanced relationships for many years. And then when they're done with the unbalanced relationship, they get themselves into another one. One of my patients had a new boyfriend basically every 18 months for 20 years, and they were all bad. All the relationships were unbalanced. Another one of my patients was in 5 marriages, and it was only marriage number 5 that was mutually supportive. And she married that person at age 54. So something shifted in you that made you decide you deserved better. Can you put your finger on how that came about? Because to do that in a year is unusual in my experience, and really a credit to you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's a really good question. And the best answer I can give you is definitely my spirituality. I accredit most of it to the church that I'm in, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and just my connection with God. And after the divorce, it was very surprising. I consider it a miracle, to be honest. But I could have resorted to, it's all my fault. The divorce is all my fault because he left me out of the blue. He just packed up and left. And so I could have definitely taken all of that on and said, it's all my fault. I'm the worst. I'm so bad. I don't deserve, no one's going to marry me anymore because I'm a loser. No one, but I was like, the only thing I can do is just start reading the scriptures and start praying. And so I did that like every day. I was reading everything I could about anything about Jesus Christ, about God. And after a couple weeks, I felt really good about myself. And I felt like I had some of that self-worth. And, I was like, you know what? I'm going to find someone that will love me for who I am, that will accept me for who I am. And I'm also going to take all the bad parts that I did in my marriage and try my very best to be a little bit better each and every day. And so I really accredit it to just my spirituality in general. And that's what my current husband, he's in the same church as me. And we had been friends for a long time. It's actually a really funny story. He was friends with my ex-husband. We were all friends together. And so he was at my first wedding. We never had romantic feelings for each other. But after the divorce, when we randomly bumped into each other and when we started talking, my husband claims that my spirituality was just like crazy high as opposed to, a couple years earlier when we served the same mission together. And so that's what attracted him. That's what attracted him to me. Is that the right wording?
Yes, I get it.
That's basically because my spirituality was so high, and he thought that was so admirable that instead of, feeling down on myself and beating myself up, I was really pushing myself to say, hey, this is a turning point for me. I'm going to try to be better, and I am going to look for someone better. I didn't really necessarily know how to look for that, but it was because of there's a saying in the scriptures, it's by their fruits ye shall know. So like the fruits being, if they love other people, if they're kind to other people. And I saw that with my current husband, with Luke. I saw that he was kind to other people and he was a great listener and he was so selfless. And I was like, I think this is what I need, and because of that, I attribute it to my church and my relationship with
it's the relationship between neuroplastic symptoms and God or Jesus or a higher power is a very interesting one that I've seen play out in many different ways with my patients who are spiritual over the years. And for the most part, it's a very positive thing, the way you have experienced it. Many of my patients, unfortunately, grew up in environments where the only thing that loved them was God or Jesus or a higher power. And it saved them. I mean, it literally saved them to know that there was something out there that cared about them. Other people have grown up with a watchful and vengeful higher power that has contributed to their illness, and they had to get out from under that in order to become well. But in your case, you were able to find love of yourself from originally the love of a higher power. And To be able to create that for yourself, at that time in your life in such a short space of time is really remarkable that you were able to do that. And it also kind of connects with why you were experiencing illness, that in the sort of terms of the timeline that, after your divorce and you were at home, your illness took a turn for the worse. And there you were in an environment that was not emotionally supportive, and not being able to sort of get out of the house and get on with your life would have been, further confirmation of the negative ideas you had about yourself. So that wouldn't be at all surprising that your symptoms would get worse at that period of time. And it could easily have been a spiral where, the longer you stay at home in that environment that was not sufficiently supportive, and the more negatively you thought about yourself because you couldn't get out of that could have made the pain worse. And then the spiral, the vicious cycle would have continued. I have seen patients who were in environments like that for years and couldn't get out because, nobody gave them any guidance. But you were able to pull yourself out of it in a very short space of time. And then something else that I've observed in a lot of my patients is that it's only when they have achieved an appropriate level of self-love, appropriate level of self-esteem, that they are able to accept someone into their life who cares about them. If you don't care about yourself enough, it's never going to feel right to be with somebody who cares about you. You have to first achieve that level of belief in yourself as a valuable human being. And when people do that, the right guy or woman or whoever comes along. They just kind of eventually magically appear because you are ready for them and they can see something in you. The wrong kind of person, the one who needs an infinite level of support without giving anything back, they are no longer going to find you attractive because they sense that you're not going to give them the infinite amount of support that they want in a relationship. And so they move on. The right kind of person, on the other hand, tends to show up when you believe you deserve them. My patient who had the new boyfriend every 18 months for 20 years, we had a long conversation about the challenging issues that she had grown up with. And it helped her to recognize that even though there wasn't any physical or sexual abuse in her home, that she had nevertheless gone through a very difficult experience, and it took heroic perseverance for her to get through it, and I think for you as well. And when you internalize that belief in yourself, it's a foundation for self-esteem. It's a flip in self-image from somebody who's a worthless loser to somebody who has come through an experience that they would never want for a child of their own. Let's put it that way. And when you internalize that belief in yourself as a valuable human being, it completely changes the nature of relationships that people find themselves in. They're less tolerant of being mistreated by others, including their family and the workplace and neighbors or whoever, people at church. They just recognize they deserve better. And it leads to these much more positive relationships. Now, some of my patients, ironically, when they meet the right partner and begin to form that relationship, it can be very stressful at the beginning. And I don't know if you experience this or not, but a lot of my patients do, where, again, the imposter syndrome can come up where they're feeling like, gosh, I've got this wonderful person that wants to go out with me. Do I really deserve them? Are they going to realize that I'm actually a worthless loser and dump me, tomorrow or next week? So it can be very stressful. I don't know. Did you experience that at all?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't as maybe severe, but I definitely maybe within the first couple months, I had that sort of imposter syndrome where I would look at Luke and be like, man, he is 100% perfect. He never does anything wrong. He cooks for me. He cleans for me. How did I land this guy? And then I look at myself and I'm like, what am I doing to show him I love him? And so I definitely had that imposter syndrome. But I think the most important part was me coming to Luke and saying what I was feeling and saying, hey, man, I feel a little bit inferior to you because you're just so perfect. I feel like you're perfect. Like, you haven't done anything wrong. And I would express to him these things, and he would always validate me and comfort me and say, no, like, I'm not perfect. Just remember that. Like, I do things, I make mistakes all the time. We're in this together. Neither of us are better than each other. Framing it like, again, he's awesome. He's amazing. And so whenever he would validate me, I'd kind of bring me down and be like, okay, that's right. Like, come back to reality. We're on the same level. Neither of us are better than each other. We both have our differences. And yeah, I mean, I went through phases, but I think slowly over time, it started to sort of go down.
Okay. No, that's very, very common. In fact, many of my patients, when they're going through that, they actually become physically ill over it. Whatever their symptom was, if they had one beforehand, can actually flare up during that period of time. I call it the good partner, bad illness syndrome. It can also come about, from any life-affirming experience. One of my patients got the Employee of the Year award at a 400-person company, and it was very affirming for him. But he had grown up in an environment where he was made to feel like nothing he ever did was good enough, and it was such a contrast for him that it stirred up a lot of emotion. That's the second way in which meeting a good partner can be stressful, is that it's a contrast with what you grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that contrast, it can stir up some emotions. It can make people feel like, well, if I deserve to be treated as well as I am by this person I'm in a relationship with, then that means I'm probably a pretty good person.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a pretty good person, then it means I probably deserve to be under somewhat less pressure as a girl.
Yeah.
I don't know if that thought crossed your mind at all.
Oh, yes, all the time. Like, when me and Luke were dating, I would cry in his arms like every day, because I was like, if you love me, then I must be doing something right. Sorry, I'm like getting emotional over this.
Sorry.
No, yeah, looking back, like, it was so reaffirming to me that, like, he loved me, because it was like, oh my gosh, like, I must be doing something right then. And it was so validating to me that I'm like, I'm not a bad person, It was the first time where someone told me that I was a good person, and that, like, he looked up to me. And I was like, no one has ever looked up to me before. And I think also, I forgot to mention this before, but a big thing that also happened in my life was in my mission, I came home early. And it's very taboo to come home from your mission early. People judge you all the time because they're like, oh, what happened where you had to come home early? Did you do something wrong? Do you have mental issues or something? You're kind of looked down upon a lot, at least in Utah. And so I came home from my mission because to serve a mission, you have to be worthy. And there's kind of like a checklist of being worthy, which I know sounds really toxic, but obviously you can never be like worthy. You can never be perfect. But there were some big things that you like could not have done to serve a mission. And I had done one of those things. And so halfway through my mission, I was like, I need to go home because I'm not worthy. I've like made some big mistakes, some big sins. I should not be serving. I went home from the mission. And usually when people go home, they just stay home, And like 6 months later, in the middle of COVID happened while I went home. So like the missions were crazy, people didn't know what to do, but I went back out on the mission. And it was right smack dab in the middle of COVID. It was like June of 2021. Is that when COVID? No, 2020. It was June of 2020. And I went back out and I finished my mission. And Luke always told me how admirable that was. He like really looked up to me because I chose to go back out on my mission, where a lot of missionaries just stay home. They don't want to go back out. And because of that, because I went back out on the mission, is also really what led me to picking myself up after the divorce. After the divorce, I was like, you know what? I picked myself up when I left home from the mission. I can do it again. And my life, when I went back out on the mission, was so much better. Like, I had the best mission experience. I loved it. It changed my life. So when I looked back on that experience, when the divorce happened, I was like, you know what? If I pick myself up again, I think something good will happen. So it was kind of this pattern that I saw, and I just trusted that if I did the right thing and if I tried my very best to pick myself up and to love myself, that something good would happen. And then Luke came, and then it was kind of all coming together, and it was like, okay, I am a good person. Everything happened for like the perfect reason. And again, I don't blame my parents. They did the best that they could, but I definitely feel like it happened for a reason, you know? I wouldn't have met Luke if it weren't for my parents, if it weren't for my back pain, you know? And I feel like just everything, if I view everything as gratitude and not as like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not like, I could view it as anger. You know, I could be angry at my parents. I could be angry at going home from the mission or the divorce, but I choose to view it as gratitude and that it was a blessing in my life because it was, you know, and it led to the best things. And so when I view it that way, it makes me also feel a lot better about myself. And I feel like that's really shifted my perspective over time. Instead of choosing to be angry and frustrated, I choose to be thankful for these things.
So a lot of my patients, and you may have noticed that the sun has come up where I'm recording this first thing in the morning
You
in
look
December. But it sort of goes along with all these revelations that we're having in the conversation. But I think we're coming to the end anyway, so it's fine. But it sounds like a lot of my patients have a significant amount of resentment or anger at what happened to them in their family, and justifiably so. And the anger sometimes gets the most stirred up when they have met a person who cares for them a lot. But it sounds like you have worked through that, or is there still, do you think, some resentment going on?
I think I really, honestly, maybe there's a smidge left, you know, whenever I see my parents, maybe it kind of comes up again. But I also see a therapist currently, and I don't know if we want to get to this later. She's actually treating me using PRT, which is pain reprocessing therapy. And I've talked to her about all this stuff a lot, and she's helped me realize, you know, I can choose to be resentful. I can choose to do that. Or I can choose to say, hey, they were great parents. They're trying the best that they could. They're human. They're not perfect. Also, I'm a hypocrite. I'm putting a level of perfection on them too. And so we've been working through it, but obviously I do feel like it's getting a lot better. I see a lot of hope in myself in the future for, you know, when I see my parents not having those feelings come up, and then I can just love them for who they are, and I don't have to feel self-doubt or self-worth issues. And yeah, I have a lot of hope with that. So I think therapy has definitely helped the most.
Okay. No, you have made a tremendous amount of progress in a very short space of time. It's quite common for me to see people in their 30s who are only now getting to the place in their life and in their heads where you are. So for you to have achieved this at age 24, starting from the issues that you had, you know, it just isolated in your home with severe back pain to where you are today. It's really amazing how much you were able to do on your own. You clearly have a tremendous amount of determination and insight that you were able to generate, and being able to shift to a place of self-love as quickly as you did is a tribute to you and I think to your religious faith as well.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions for me? Because I think this has been a very insightful conversation that's going to be very helpful for everybody who sees it.
Yeah, I guess my question is, because I mentioned ADHD earlier, and you mentioned that you think it could go away. So I don't know, like because I've read things that the best treatment for ADHD is a combination of medication and therapy. But could it completely be, I guess, healed through the therapy I'm doing, which is pain reprocessing therapy? Or what do you think?
Well, I think the whole process you have been going through in your life with and without therapy is, let's say, it has an excellent chance of alleviating some of the symptoms that have been attributed to ADHD. You know, when you are trying to be perfect, it tends to put you on a treadmill that you almost never step off. You're constantly trying to prove to yourself and to the world that you're the best possible person there is. And, that is kind of an engine in a person's mind that is constantly pushing them. And, it's going to make them hyperactive, and it's going to make them constantly shift their attention from one thing to another. So that as your confidence in your own self-worth grows, the need for those things is going to decline naturally over time. I mean, that's not going to be the case for everybody with ADHD. I don't want to imply that everybody with ADHD can improve following this path, but I think having listened to you and understanding the journey that you've been on for the last, 6 or 7 years, it wouldn't surprise me at all if those, again, whatever made them diagnose the ADHD improves over time, because, everything else has been improving over time. I mean, how is your back pain these days?
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up. So because of the PRT therapy, pain reprocessing therapy.
That's okay. PRT is good.
It really has changed my life. And I've only had probably like 8 sessions with my current therapist. But I think the key difference is in the therapy, one of the things that we do, it's called, oh man, I can't believe I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically these exercises where I focus on my back pain, but I'm not trying to solve it. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to
somatic tracking.
Yes, somatic tracking. Thank you. That's what we do. And that's what I've been doing every day. I do the somatic tracking where I look at my back pain just from a distance. I'm not fixing it. I'm not trying to do anything with it. And I'm just observing it. And I love that because, again, throughout my whole life, I wanted to fix things. I want to be perfect. I want to be better. But now I can just look at my back pain and kind of show compassion on it in a way and look at it from just a distance and say it's there and be aware of it. And then at the same time, I can, picture something I love, like my husband or the beach. I love going to the beach. And it starts associating my back pain instead of as danger. It starts associating it with, love and peace and that it's okay, that I don't have to fix it. It's just there. And it's honestly been the coolest thing ever. My back pain has drastically gone down. I haven't had, on a scale of 1 to 10 from pain in my back pain, I haven't had a 10 in a long time. And this is within 2 months of doing the therapy. And I'd say, if I was at a 7 of pain, just overall generally the past couple years, I'd say it's probably gone down to a 2. I rarely feel the back pain anymore. And when I do, I take deep breaths. I just focus on the pain and I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to solve it. Because that's what I always resort to. I resort to fixing things, being perfect, making solving the problem. But it's not about solving the problem necessarily. It's about showing love to yourself and being aware of how you're feeling and just being mindful. And so because of that, yeah, my back pain is really, really gone down, which is amazing.
No, that's tremendous work on your part. I often tell my patients that even when the body is hurting, it's still your friend. It is your mind trying to communicate with you that there is still stress going on that needs attention. And it's signaling that to you by means of pain or illness, neuroplastic pain or illness. And that whenever that pain is flaring up, it's a good time to think about, okay, why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
What is the stress that's going on right now that my brain is trying to signal me about through the means of this pain or illness? And I think your progress is going to continue. That's the whole arc of your journey that you've been on, going from an average of around 7 down to 2, and that's going to continue. Perfectionism and the self-esteem is on the same path. It's also going to be recovering from what you learned about yourself as a kid. One of the questions I try to answer about my patients is, what did you learn about yourself as a child that isn't true? And for many of my patients, the 2 biggest things they learned are that they're not good enough and that they need to focus on the needs of everybody else in their life, to their own detriment. And those are, false assumptions that a difficult childhood environment can implant in somebody. And because you're young and because this is happening from people that are the most important to you in the world, they tend to become fundamental assumptions about yourself and how you look at the world. Therefore, it takes time to unlearn them. It's like as if you were taught that 2 + 2 = 5 at a young age.
Right.
If you're taught that and you absorb that and you believe it's true, well, whenever it comes up, you're going to make mistakes in arithmetic as an adult.
Yeah.
And once you unlearn the 2 + 2 = 5, those mistakes and the stress that's associated with it go away. That's very clearly the pathway that you're on.
I know. I'm very, very proud of myself. And if anyone is watching that feels like they can't get to this point, like, you definitely can. And, whether it's through therapy or through just showing love to yourself, like, I don't know. I don't know how I did it, but I'm so proud of myself. And if I can do it, I know that any of you guys can do it, because I would not have looked at myself and said, yeah, she can definitely pick herself up. She can solve this. She can fix this. I would have been down on myself, but we all have inherent good. We all have that inherent capability. And I know that everyone deserves that, right? Everyone deserves to be treated and healed. So.
Yep, absolutely. Another analogy that I use is for people to imagine that their early life resembled parachuting into a dangerous jungle as a toddler, and that they had to find a way to survive that environment. Even though, most of it may have been okay, some aspect of it didn't resemble the jungle. And it's appropriate to take tremendous credit for having come through that, come out the other side, and in your case, gone a very long way toward healing from that experience. Again, taking pride in that is 100% appropriate.
Yay, thank you. I know. I'm very proud of myself.
As you should be. All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing all this with us. I think everybody who sees it is going to learn a tremendous amount from your journey. And for those that are not as far along as you are, they're going to get tremendous hope from it. So thank you.
I hope so. Thank you so much. You were very insightful too. I learned so much.